3 crumpled dollar bills lay on the shelter counter. A boy of 11 stood behind them with his chin up, quite tall enough to rest his elbows on the laminate, and at the far end of the kennel row, a gray-muzzled German shepherd was being walked, slow and stiff on bad hips, toward a door he was not meant to walk back out of. "That won't even cover the fee, sweetheart," the woman at the desk said, and she said it gently, because she was tired, and it was the end of a long, cold day, and she had already signed too many of the yellow forms that morning. And honestly, that one's old. Hips are shot. He's been here 4 months, and nobody's so much as looked at him twice. Worthless to most folks, a dog that age. The boy looked down at the $3 that were every cent he had in the world. Then he looked back up. "Then nobody'll mind if he's mine," he said. What that boy did not know, what nobody in that building could have known, was that before the sun came up the next morning, 5 men who had crossed 3 oceans looking for that exact dog would be standing on his front porch. Before we go any further, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay with it until the very end. We read every single comment, and we'd love to know how far this one travels tonight. The boy's name was Caleb Mercer. He was 11 years old, going on a great deal older, the way kids get when life decides to teach them early. He was small for his age, with a serious face and a cowlick that no amount of water would lie down, and he wore a coat that had belonged to somebody bigger first. He did not cry in front of people. He had learned not to 2 years before, the winter his father's heart had quit on him at 41, a Navy man who'd spent 20 years at sea and then died in a recliner on a Tuesday with the game on. Caleb still carried his father's dog tags on a length of bootlace under his shirt, where nobody could see them, and nobody could take them. He lived with his mother in a rented half of a duplex at the edge of town. She worked 2 jobs and was gone most evenings. Caleb had grown into the kind of boy who did his homework without being told, who walked the neighbor's trash cans up the drive for $1, who saved his coins in a jelly jar on the windowsill. There were $9 in that jar the morning he started. There were 3 left when he stood at that counter, because somewhere in the back of his chest he had decided that he could not stand in a warm building and watch a soldier, even a 4-legged one, be thrown away like he was nothing. The dog they called Worthless was a German shepherd of nearly 13 years, and time had not been kind to the parts of him you could see. Muzzle had gone white, his eyes were filmed at the edges, and his back legs trembled when he stood too long. Coat was thin and dull, and he carried a deep, ugly band of scar tissue around his neck, where something had ridden there for a long time and rubbed the fur away to nothing. He did not bark. He did not wag. He lay in the back of his run with his chin on his paws and watched the world go by. The way old soldiers watch a parade, they are no longer marching in. But when the small boy crouched down outside his bars, slow, the way you approach something that's been hurt. The old dog lifted his white head off his paws for the first time in weeks. He held the boy's eyes for a long moment. And then he got up on his shaking legs and came to the front of the run and pressed the side of his face against the cold steel as close to the boy as the bars would let him get. The kennel tech who saw it stopped what she was doing. "Huh," she said softly. "He hasn't done that for anybody." The town sat in a fold of cold hills where the winter came early and stayed late. The shelter was a low cinder block building out past the grain elevator with a flag snapping over a gravel lot. Outside it smelled of bleach and wet concrete, and the particular weariness of a place that takes in more than it can ever send back out. The fluorescent lights laid everything in that flat, forgiving glow that makes the whole world look like 4 in the afternoon. Caleb's house, when he led the old dog home on a borrowed leash through the dusk, was small and clean and quiet, with a porch light his mother always left on and a square of fenced yard out back. The dog walked the whole way at the boy's left knee without being told, in a heel so steady and so practiced that a person who knew what to look for would have wondered. But there was no one on that road to wonder. There was just a boy and an old dog and the first stars coming out hard and bright, over the hills, and a band of scar around a graying neck that told a story nobody in that town had bothered to read. The man who had written that story went by Wade Tolliver, and 3 years earlier he had paid almost nothing for a retired military dog he'd heard might make a guard animal for the salvage yard he ran on the county line. He had found out fast that a decorated working dog does not become a junkyard dog, that you cannot beat the training in or the loyalty out, so he had done what men like Wade Tolliver do with a thing that won't perform. He had chained him to a barrel at the back of the lot and left him there through 3 winters, fed when Wade remembered, the chain wearing that band into his neck an inch at a time. Wade had a reputation in that county. 2 prior animal complaints had gone nowhere. He knew the right people and threatened the rest. He had a cousin in the clerk's office and a lawyer on retainer for the lawsuits he liked to file. When the old dog finally got too lame to even look menacing, Wade had hauled him to the shelter, signed him over as a worthless stray he'd found, driven off without looking back. He'd said it to the kennel tech on his way out, with a shrug, as the closest thing he had to a goodbye. Do what you want with him. He's done. He's not worth the kibble. He believed that, the way he believed most ugly things, easily, without ever once being made to pay for it. But the dog was not worthless, and he was not a stray. Somewhere under the matted fur of his left ear there was a tattoo, and somewhere under the skin between his shoulder blades there was a microchip, the size of a grain of rice that no one at the shelter had thought to scan in 4 months, until the night a kennel tech, finishing Caleb's adoption paperwork, ran the wand across the old dog's back out of nothing but habit and watched a string of numbers come up on her screen that did not belong to any county registry she had ever seen. It belonged to the military working dog database. The moment those numbers were entered, somewhere far away a standing alert that a man had set and never canceled, that he had checked every single day for 2.5 years, lit up a phone in the dark. The dog had a name. It was not a county shelter number, and it was not the old shepherd. His name was Ghost. There was a man who had spent 31 months refusing to believe he was dead. They came up the road as the sky was going gray. Caleb's mother saw them first from the kitchen window. 5 men climbing out of 2 trucks in the half-light, big men, quiet men, moving with the economy that made her set down her coffee. They came up the walk together, and the one in front knocked when Caleb opened the door in his pajamas with the old dog standing at his side. The man on the porch did not look at the boy at first. He looked at the dog, and the dog, who had not run in 2 years, who could barely climb the porch steps, came up off his haunches and crossed that threshold and pressed his whole trembling body into the man's legs. The man, 6'2", and built like something carved out of a harder material than the rest of us, went down on both knees on the cold porch boards and put his arms around a graying neck and made a sound that none of his brothers had ever heard him make. His name was Senior Chief Petty Officer Logan Hayes, United States Navy, retired, and he was 41 years old. He was tall and weathered and lean in the way of men who have spent their lives carrying heavy things up bad hills, with close dark hair gone gray at the temples and a jaw shadowed with a long drive's worth of beard. There was a scar that pulled at the corner of his mouth and a stillness in him that never fully switched off. His eyes were a deep, settled brown, the kind of eyes that had measured 1,000 doorways and 1,000 horizons, and had taught themselves, somewhere along the way, to hold steady on whatever came through. And right now they were wet, and he was not ashamed of it. The 4 men behind him stood with their hats in their hands and let him have the moment. Logan had done 5 deployments with a SEAL team, 2 in the Helmand River Valley, and others in places he'd signed his name promising never to name. On a night near a village whose location was still classified, a multi-purpose canine named Ghost had alerted on a buried charge in a doorway and stopped 6 men cold 3 feet short of the wire that would have ended all of them. Those 6 men were 5 now. They came home and scattered to 5 states and 5 different ways of carrying it. But every one of them had signed something the day Ghost retired, promising to take him, and every one of them had been told, by a contractor's paperwork, that the dog had been adopted out to a good home and was thriving. The paperwork had lied. Ghost had gone to a chain at the back of a salvage yard. His handler had spent 2.5 years checking a database every morning, refusing to stop because Logan Hayes did not leave people behind, and he had never once considered that dog anything less than a person. He stood up on the porch, and he took Caleb's small hand in his enormous one, and he shook it, gravely, the way you shake the hand of an equal. "Son," he said, "you spent everything you had to save a man who saved my whole life. I don't have the words for what that's worth." The 4 others came up one at a time and did the same. A corpsman named Reed, who'd been one of the 6, a sniper named Cole, a big quiet machine gunner named Jackson, a younger man named Nathan, who joined the team after, and knew Ghost only by the legend of him. They had driven and flown through the night from 4 states the instant the chip pinged, and they had come, they told Caleb's stunned mother in her kitchen, to do 3 things: to see the dog with their own eyes, to make sure he never wanted for anything again, and to thank the boy who'd done in $3 what their whole brotherhood had failed to do in 3 years. It should have ended there, warm and complete. It did not, because Wade Tolliver read the newspaper. The story had moved fast in a small town: a boy, $3, a discarded war dog, 5 Navy SEALs on a porch at dawn. And by the time it reached the regional paper, the old shepherd that nobody had wanted was suddenly the most famous dog in 3 counties, and famous things Wade knew were worth money. He showed up at the duplex 2 days later with his lawyer and a smile and a surrender form he claimed had been signed under a misunderstanding. He stood on Caleb's mother's porch and said that the dog was lawfully his property, that the shelter had had no right to adopt out an animal that was only ever temporarily surrendered for boarding, that he was prepared to take the boy's family to court for the return of his valuable animal, or, he added, to make the whole problem disappear for a reasonable sum. Behind the screen door, the old dog who had not growled in years rose up off the floor and let a low, certain sound roll out of his chest, aimed through the mesh, straight at the man who had worn that scar into his neck. Caleb's mother did not have a lawyer. She had 2 jobs and a jar that was empty now and a son with his jaw set. For one cold afternoon, it looked very much like Wade Tolliver was going to win, the way he always won, because the law in that county had a habit of bending toward men who knew how to lean on it. The boy sat on the floor that evening with both arms around the old dog's neck, his face pressed into the thin fur. The old dog leaned his entire failing weight into the boy and held still, the way he had held still for 6 frightened men in a doorway a long time ago. Caleb did not cry, but he made a phone call to a number a senior chief had written on the back of a grocery receipt and told him to use if anything ever went wrong. He told Logan Hayes that the man who'd hurt Ghost was trying to take him back. There was a silence on the line. Then Logan said, in a voice gone very quiet and very calm, "Don't sign anything. Don't open the door to him again. We're coming back." They came back the next morning, all 5, and they did not come alone. Wade arrived at the appointed hour with his lawyer, expecting a frightened woman and a check, found instead 5 SEALs standing on the lawn in the cold, and a county animal control officer, and a reporter with a camera, veterinarian holding a folder, and the old dog sitting in the open doorway behind the boy. When Wade's people moved to lead the dog to their truck, Ghost walked down the steps on his shaking legs and lay down flat in the frozen grass, directly between Wade Tolliver and the boy, and would not be moved, and would not go to him, and the meaning of it needed no words at all. Logan Hayes stepped forward. He told Wade without heat exactly who he was and exactly who the dog was, the rank, the deployments, the operation, the 6 men, the 5 that were left. Then he opened the folder the veterinarian had brought, in front of the camera and the animal control officer, and the lawyer who was beginning to look like he wanted to be somewhere else. He laid the truth out flat and complete. The band of scar tissue consistent with 2 to 3 years on a short chain, the documented malnutrition, the arthritis left untreated, the surrender form on which Wade himself had written the word stray about an animal he had owned, which was its own crime. He read out the 2 prior complaints. He named the state office that had received the file that morning. Then he told Wade Tolliver the only thing that mattered. That boy paid $3 and gave that dog more in one night than you gave him in 3 years. The adoption is final, it's legal, and it's been reviewed by people who do not owe your cousin anything. You're not getting this dog. What you're getting is a phone call from the county prosecutor. He gave the man one chance to turn around and walk to his truck before the animal. Control officer had questions, and it was a kindness Wade did not deserve and did not recognize. Wade did what men like Wade do when the ground they've always stood on turns out to be air. The smile curdled. "You think you can come to my county and," he started, "and that dog is worth real money now and he's mine, and this isn't over. I'll have lawyers all over you." And Logan Hayes simply looked at him and said nothing at all, because the loudest a man ever gets is the half-second, before he understands he has already lost, and silence was the only answer the moment required. The animal control officer asked Wade to wait by his vehicle. The reporter's camera kept rolling, and in front of every person there, a man who had called a living loyal creature worthless and then come back to sell him was walked off a lawn diminished to exactly his right size, while the dog he'd chained to a barrel lay warm in the grass with his head on an 11-year-old's knee. Logan watched it without a flicker of satisfaction. There was nothing in it to enjoy. There was only a thing that had been wrong for a long time, finally being set right. By the following summer, the account had settled the slow, honest way real accounts do. Wade Tolliver was charged with felony animal cruelty and the fraudulent surrender, pleaded to a sentence that included a permanent ban on owning any animal ever again, watched his salvage yard's name turn into something people said, the way you say a bad word. The 5 SEALs did the 3 things they'd promised, and a 4th they hadn't. Set up an account that covered every dollar of Ghost's senior care for the rest of his life. The surgeries and the soft beds and the good food came back in 1s and 2s all through that year, sitting on the little porch with the boy and the old dog and telling the kind of stories only get told in low voices. And on a warm gold evening in June, Senior Chief Logan Hayes stood in Caleb Mercer's backyard in front of the boy's mother and the 4 men, who were the only family he had left, pressed his own team's coin into the boy's palm and folded the small fingers over it and told him he'd earned it more honestly than most men who'd worn the uniform. Ghost lived another good year and a half, longer than anybody had a right to expect, fat and warm and slow, sleeping in a patch of sun by the back door, with the boy's father's dog tags resting against his collar where Caleb had hung them. On the last evening of it, the old dog, who had crossed deserts and survived a chain, and found his way home on $3, lifted his white head off his paws one more time, looked at the boy who had seen his worth when the whole world had priced him at nothing, thumped his tail twice against the warm boards before he closed his eyes, at peace and home, and never once forgotten again. Sometimes the things the world prices at $3 are the things heaven keeps on a different ledger entirely. Sometimes the soldier everybody else has written off as worthless and old and done is lying in the back corner of the last cage, waiting for one person young enough or poor enough or good enough to still believe that loyalty is not measured in money, quick to put a price on what a thing is worth to us, and slow to ask what it was worth to the ones it carried out of the fire. But God does not appraise the way we appraise. He does not call any faithful soul worthless. He has a way of placing exactly the right heart in front of exactly the right empty jar, so that a boy with $3 and a father's dog tags around his neck can do, in a single act of mercy, what 5 hardened men and an entire brotherhood could not: bring a hero home. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that worth is not the same thing as price, that no act of kindness is ever too small to change a life. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And tell us, have you ever seen someone the world had given up on and refused to look away? Your words tonight might be the light somebody is waiting for. If you believe in stories of loyalty, mercy, and brotherhood that crosses oceans, subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. God bless you. Protect your family. Watch over every old soldier and every forgotten dog waiting in the cold tonight. Remind you always, you are never worthless, you are never finished, and you are never, ever alone.